The studio lights blazed overhead as Steve Harvey stood frozen at his podium. Microphone gripped so tightly in his hand that his knuckles had gone pale. His famous smile had vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief that cut through the cheerful atmosphere of Family Feud like a knife through paper. Contestant Marcus Aldridge, a middle-aged man from Tennessee with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit, had just said something that made the entire studio fall into suffocating silence. "Well, Steve, you people always complain about everything anyway, so I figured—" Steve's hand shot up, cutting him off mid-sentence. The gesture was sharp, final, authoritative in a way the audience had never seen from the beloved host. His chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched visibly in his cheek. "Stop, right there." Steve's voice was low, dangerous, each word measured and deliberate. "Say one more word and we're done here." The production crew behind the cameras exchanged panicked glances. Director Patricia Chun pressed her headset closer to her ear, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold through the monitors. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't supposed to happen. 20 years of hosting this show, and she'd never seen Steve look like this. Marcus seemed oblivious to the gravity of what he'd just done. He chuckled nervously, glancing at his family members standing at the contestant podium beside him. His wife Jennifer with her hand over her mouth, his teenage daughter Ashley staring at her shoes, his son Brandon looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I was just making a joke, Steve. Come on, man. Don't be so sensitive." The microphone hit the podium with a sharp crack that echoed through the studio. Steve Harvey, the man who'd made millions laugh, who'd become America's favorite game show host through decades of warmth and humor, turned his back on the cameras and walked straight toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, each one deliberate and heavy with purpose. Steve, wait." Patricia's voice cracked as she jumped from her director's chair, clipboard clattering to the floor. But he didn't stop. He didn't even look back. The studio audience sat paralyzed in their seats. Hundreds of people who'd traveled from across the country to watch their favorite show being taped, now witnessing something unprecedented. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered urgently to their neighbors. A woman in the third row had tears streaming down her face. Backstage, in the narrow corridor lined with equipment cases and costume racks, Steve finally stopped. He leaned against the wall, his forehead pressed against the cool concrete, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. 59 years of dealing with this. 59 years of smiling through it, of being the bigger person, of turning the other cheek. And still it found him, even here in his own house on his own show. Production assistant Tyrone Williams rounded the corner and stopped dead when he saw Steve. The young man, fresh out of UCLA Film School, had worked on the show for only 6 months, but he'd never seen his boss like this. Vulnerable, human, hurt. "Mr. Harvey, sir, are you—" "Don't." Steve held up a hand without turning around. "Just give me a minute, Ty." But there was no time for minutes. The machine had to keep moving. Patricia came rushing through the door, followed by executive producer Michael Goldstein, whose face had gone red with stress. Behind them, the network representative, Sandra Kim, was already on her phone, her voice tight with panic as she spoke rapidly to someone about damage control and PR strategies. "Steve, listen to me." Patricia approached carefully, like she was dealing with a wounded animal. "I know what he said was unacceptable. It was vile. But we've got 300 people out there, 2 families waiting to play, and we're on a schedule. Network's already breathing down my neck about costs." Steve turned to face them, and Patricia actually took a step back at the expression on his face. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something deeper, more painful. Exhaustion. Bone-deep weariness. "You want me to go back out there and smile? Crack jokes with a man who just looked me in the eye and said, 'You people?'" His voice cracked slightly on the last words. "Pat, I've done a lot of things in my career. I've swallowed my pride more times than I can count. But this? Not today." Michael stepped forward, his business brain already calculating. We can edit it out. We'll scrap the footage, ban the family, issue a statement. The audience signed NDAs. This isn't about coverage or PR, Mike. Steve's voice grew stronger now, steadier. This is about drawing a line. About saying enough is enough. If I walk back out there like nothing happened, what message does that send? To him? To his kids? To everyone watching? Sandra lowered her phone, her expression conflicted. The network is threatening to pull the plug on production for the rest of the day. That's $40,000 down the drain, Steve. Not to mention the lawsuits from the other family who prepared for months to be here. The weight of it all pressed down on Steve's shoulders. He thought about his own children, his grandchildren. He thought about every black kid watching the show who'd see him laugh off that comment like it didn't matter. He thought about his mother, who'd raised him in Cleveland's projects, who'd taught him to stand tall no matter what anyone said to him. Back in the studio, Marcus Aldridge stood at the contestant podium looking increasingly uncomfortable as the silence stretched on. His wife Jennifer had moved several inches away from him, her face pale and drawn. Their daughter Ashley had tears running silently down her cheeks, while Brandon stared at his father with something that looked like disgust. The opposing family, the Washingtons from Atlanta, a black family who'd driven 18 hours to be here, stood at their podium in various states of shock and solidarity. Grandmother Ruth Washington, 73 years old with silver hair and fierce eyes, had her hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, whispering something in her ear. In the audience, tensions were rising. A man in row 5 stood up. That's not okay. That man needs to apologize. Others joined in, voices rising in agreement. Security guards positioned themselves strategically, ready to intervene if things escalated. Jennifer Aldridge finally found her voice. She turned to her husband, her own voice shaking with suppressed emotion. What is wrong with you? How could you say something like that? Marcus's facade finally cracked. I didn't mean it came out wrong. I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were. This came from Brandon, his son, whose voice was steady despite the trembling in his hands. Dad, you say stuff like this at home all the time. You just finally said it in front of cameras. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Ashley sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. Jennifer closed her eyes, looking like she might be sick. Backstage, Tyrone had pulled out his phone and was showing Steve something. It was Twitter, already exploding with the hashtag #StandWithSteve. Somehow, despite the NDA's, word had gotten out. Audience members were posting. The story was spreading like wildfire. Mr. Harvey, look at this. Tyrone scrolled through hundreds of tweets. People are supporting you. They're saying you did the right thing walking out. Some are even sharing their own stories of experiencing racism at work and wishing they'd had the courage to walk away. Steve took the phone, his eyes scanning the messages. A woman in Texas talked about staying silent when her boss made similar comments. A teacher in New York described hearing students use the same language Marcus had used. A father in Chicago thanked Steve for showing his son that dignity matters more than a paycheck. Patricia watched Steve's face carefully. She'd worked with him for 7 years, had seen him navigate difficult contestants, awkward moments, and technical disasters with grace and humor. But this was different. This cut deeper. What if, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, we do something different, not going back to business as usual, but addressing it head-on. Michael looked alarmed. Pat, that's not protocol. The network won't. The network doesn't control everything. Patricia's voice gained strength. Steve's right. We can't just sweep this under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. That makes us complicit. Sandra was back on her phone, but this time her tone was different. She was pushing back against whoever was on the other end, her voice firm. No, I'm not telling him that. You want this network associated with racism, go ahead and fire him. See how that plays in the media. An idea was forming in Steve's mind. He looked at the faces around him. Patricia, hopeful and determined. Michael, nervous but nodding slowly. Tyrone, young and idealistic. Sandra, fighting corporate on his behalf. Then he thought about the Washingtons who'd driven so far only to witness this. He thought about the audience members who'd come expecting joy and laughter. He thought about Marcus's children, who were learning a crucial lesson today about consequences. Here's what we're going to do. Steve straightened up, his voice regaining its familiar authority. I'm going back out there, but we're not continuing the game. We're going to have a conversation, a real one, about what just happened and why it matters. Patricia's eyes lit up. A teachable moment. More than that. Steve was pacing now, his mind working. Marcus doesn't get to just apologize and move on. His family stays on that stage while we talk about the real impact of those words. The Washingtons get to share their perspective if they want to. And the audience, we're going to hear from them too. Michael looked like he might faint. Steve, that's not a game show anymore. That's a talk show. We don't have approval for. Then don't air it. Steve cut him off. But those 300 people in that studio right now, they're going to witness something real. They're going to be part of something that matters. And if the network wants to bury it, that's their choice. But I won't be part of pretending this didn't happen. Sandra ended her call and looked at Steve with newfound respect. The network president wants to speak with you directly. But I told him you're making the call on this one. It's your show, your reputation on the line. Steve nodded slowly. Then let's do this right. When Steve Harvey walked back onto that stage 10 minutes later, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The game show set suddenly felt like a courtroom, a church, a classroom all at once. The audience sat forward in their seats, some with tissues in hand, others with phones ready to record history. Steve didn't go to his podium. Instead, he walked to the center of the stage and stood there, microphone in hand, facing the audience directly. Y'all saw what happened here. His voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the studio. And I need you to understand something. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I love this job. I love making people laugh, bringing families together, giving away money that changes lives. But I will not sacrifice my dignity or the dignity of my people to do it. The audience erupted in applause. It started in the back rows and rolled forward like a wave, growing louder and stronger. Steve held up his hand, and gradually the noise subsided. Marcus. Steve turned to face the contestant, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. You said something that hurt me. More than that, you said something that echoes centuries of pain, of dismissal, of dehumanization. You might think those are just words, but words have power. They carry history, they carry hate, and they cause real harm. Marcus opened his mouth, but Steve wasn't finished. I want you to look at your daughter right now. Look at Ashley. Marcus turned to his daughter, who was still crying silently. The cameras captured every moment, though no one knew yet if this footage would ever see the light of day. That young woman is learning from you every single day. She's learning how to treat people who look different from her. She's learning what's acceptable to say and what's not. Right now, she's learning whether her father is willing to acknowledge when he's wrong. Steve's voice softened. What do you want to teach her today, Marcus? The question hung in the air. Jennifer had her arm around Ashley now, both of them watching Marcus with expectant, heartbroken expressions. Brandon stood separate, arms crossed, his face hard. Marcus's voice came out broken, rough. I was raised with certain, my father said things, and He stopped, swallowed hard. That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse. I said something terrible, and I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Tell me why it was terrible. Steve stepped closer. Don't apologize because you got caught. Don't apologize because you're embarrassed. Tell me why those words, you people, why they're wrong. This was the moment. The entire studio held its breath. Marcus looked at his feet, at his family, at the ceiling, anywhere but at Steve. His face was red, whether from shame or anger or discomfort, no one could tell. Because Marcus's voice cracked. Because it reduces you to something less than human. It creates an us versus them. It's the language of segregation and discrimination. My grandfather used to talk about you people, and he meant it to keep black folks separate, to justify treating them as inferior. He finally met Steve's eyes, and I'm ashamed that those words came out of my mouth. I'm ashamed that I hurt you. I'm ashamed that my children had to hear that from their father. Steve nodded slowly. Ruth Washington, can you come here, please? The grandmother from the opposing family walked to center stage with dignity and grace. She stood beside Steve, looking at Marcus with eyes that had seen decades of this same story play out in different forms. Mrs. Washington, Steve said gently, will you tell us what you felt when you heard those words? Ruth's voice was steady and strong. I felt tired. That's the first thing. Just bone tired. Because I'm 73 years old, and I marched in Selma. I sat at lunch counters where I wasn't wanted. I raised 4 children in a world that told them they were less than. And I thought maybe, just maybe, my grandchildren wouldn't have to hear you people in their lifetime. She turned to Marcus. But here we are, still fighting the same fight. Still having to explain our humanity to folks who should already know better. Ashley broke away from her mother and did something no one expected. She walked over to Ruth Washington and, with tears streaming down her face, hugged her. The older woman stiffened for just a moment before wrapping her arms around the teenager. I'm so sorry, Ashley whispered, but the microphones picked it up. I'm so sorry. Ruth held her for a long moment before gently pulling back. Baby, you didn't say those words. Don't carry your father's burden. But you do have a choice about what you do next. You can let this moment teach you, or you can forget it and repeat his mistakes. Steve turned to the audience. How many of you have experienced something like this? Not necessarily the exact words, but the feeling behind them, the dismissal, the othering. Hands went up across the studio. More than half the audience. Black hands, brown hands, Asian hands, even some white hands from people who'd witnessed it happen to others. And how many of you have said something you regret? Something that hurt someone, even if you didn't mean it to? More hands went up. This time, nearly everyone. The solidarity of shared imperfection. Steve walked slowly across the stage, making eye contact with different audience members as he spoke. This is the conversation America doesn't want to have. It's uncomfortable. It's messy. There are no easy answers. But if we can't talk about it here in this space, where can we? A woman in the front row raised her hand. Steve pointed to her, and a production assistant rushed over with a microphone. My name is Sandra, and I'm from Ohio. I'm white, and I grew up in a town that was 98% white. I didn't know any black people until college. And I said ignorant things because I simply didn't know better. But here's the thing. Her voice grew stronger. Once someone educated me, once I understood the pain my words caused, it became my responsibility to do better, to learn, to change. What I want to know is, will Marcus do the work? All eyes turned back to Marcus. The question was direct, challenging, necessary. I don't even know where to start, Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Brandon spoke up then, surprising everyone. I do. I've been doing research on my own, Dad. Reading books you wouldn't let in our house. Following people online who talk about these things. I can help you, if you actually want to change. The offer hung between father and son. A bridge being extended across years of learned prejudice and silent complicity. Steve looked at Michael and Patricia in the wings. The producer nodded, understanding passing between them. This was bigger than one episode of a game show. This was a moment that could ripple outward, touching lives beyond this studio. Here's what's going to happen, Steve announced. The Washingtons are getting their shot to play. Full game, full prize potential, filmed on a different day with the respect and dignity they deserve. Marcus, your family is going home. Not as a punishment, but as a reality check. You've got work to do. He turned to face the cameras directly, knowing that whether this aired on television or not, people in the studio would share what happened here. To everyone watching, whether you're here in person or hearing about this later, this is the cost of silence. When we stay quiet in the face of racism, even casual racism, we give it permission to continue. When we laugh it off or tell people to not be so sensitive, we become part of the problem. Steve's voice grew passionate now, resonant with conviction. But when we stand up, when we speak out, when we say, no, that's not okay, that's when change happens. One moment at a time, one conversation at a time, one person finding the courage to do better. The studio erupted in applause again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just support for Steve. It was acknowledgement, agreement, a collective decision to witness this moment and carry it forward. As the taping ended and the audience filed out, something remarkable happened. People didn't rush for the exits. They lingered, talking to each other in small clusters. Strangers were sharing stories, exchanging phone numbers, promising to continue these conversations in their own communities. The Aldridge family stood together near their podium, having a quiet, intense discussion. Jennifer had her arms around both her children. Marcus stood slightly apart, but Brandon reached out and touched his father's arm, saying something too quiet for others to hear. Whatever it was, Marcus nodded, his eyes red. Ruth Washington approached them before leaving. The family tensed, but she simply extended her hand to Marcus. I don't forgive easy, and I don't forget, she said clearly. But if you do the work, real work, not just saying sorry, then maybe there's hope for you yet. Marcus shook her hand, nodding, unable to speak. Steve Harvey stood backstage, watching monitors that showed the studio slowly emptying. Patricia came to stand beside him. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or career suicide, she said with a slight smile. Maybe both. Steve allowed himself a small laugh. But I can look at myself in the mirror tomorrow. That's worth more than any paycheck. His phone had been buzzing nonstop. Messages from fellow comedians, actors, civil rights leaders, old friends from Cleveland. The overwhelming message was the same. Proud of you. We see you. Thank you. But it was the message from his granddaughter that made his eyes well up. Papa, my friends at school are talking about what you did. You showed us that standing up for what's right matters more than being comfortable. I love you. The next morning, the network made their decision. The episode would air, unedited, with additional content, interviews with sociologists, historians, and psychologists discussing the impact of racial microaggressions and the importance of accountability. It would be accompanied by resources for viewers who wanted to educate themselves further. The ratings for that special episode broke records. It sparked conversations in living rooms, classrooms, and boardrooms across the country. Some viewers praised it. Others criticized it, calling it too political or divisive. But no one could ignore it. 3 months later, Steve received a letter from Ashley Aldridge. In it, she described how that day had changed her family. Her father was attending workshops on racial equity. Brandon had started a diversity club at his high school. Their family had joined a coalition working on racial justice in their community. The work was hard, she wrote, and sometimes her father backslid into old patterns of thinking. But they kept pushing forward, kept learning, kept growing. You could have just walked away, she wrote in closing. But you came back and gave us a chance to learn. Thank you for believing we could be better. Steve kept that letter in his desk drawer, pulling it out on days when the weight of being a public figure felt too heavy. It reminded him why moments of discomfort matter, why taking a stand, even when it costs something, creates space for transformation. The incident became a case study in business schools and diversity training programs. not as an example of what went wrong, but as a model for how to address racism when it happens, directly, honestly, and with a commitment to education over punishment alone. And every time Steve Harvey walked onto that Family Feud stage after that day, he carried the memory of that moment with him. The reminder that his platform was bigger than entertainment, that his voice could be a catalyst for change, that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply refuse to pretend everything is okay when it's not. The show continued, families played, laughter filled the studio, but underneath it all there was a new awareness, a new intention. The game was still a game, but the people playing it, and the man hosting it, understood that every moment was an opportunity to choose dignity, respect, and truth. And in that understanding, something powerful took root. Not perfection, but progress. Not silence, but conversation. Not comfort, but courage.